two lessons, we've been talking about grouped data. And what group data normally looks like is a table where basically we have an interval, or sometimes we don't have an interval, we just have a number, but it's grouped and it has a frequency count. Okay, and if it has a frequency count, in the last lesson, what we basically learned how to draw were two types of graphs that show a group data table. The one was a histogram, and the other one was a frequency polygon. Now, today in the lesson, we're going to finish off frequency polygons, what they are, etc. And then we're going to add a graph which needs an extra column in the data table called cumulative frequency. So that's going to be the focus of today's lesson. And that graph is called an ogive, or it's called a cumulative frequency curve. Okay, so that's going to be the main focus of today. But before we get to the ogive, can somebody remind me, how do we connect a histogram to a frequency polygon? Like, what was the recipe for making a frequency polygon from a histogram? Maybe you could raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. I just want to make sure that you remember from the last lesson what the connection between the two is. Yeah, Younger, let's come to you.
Hi, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. So to connect the frequency polygon, we put midpoints and connect all of them.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a histogram, and a histogram would just have a frequency and then intervals. And if I was just drawing one quickly, it might look, say, something like this. To get a frequency polygon, we generally use, well, we always use the midpoints of the interval of the histogram, and we actually add an interval at the beginning, at the end, just so that we can close the frequency polygon. So we add an interval on each side, and then we also find the middle of that, each of those, and then we take straight lines and we join them, join those midpoints. And then we get what's called a frequency polygon. A histogram is more common, but that's how we get a frequency polygon. And in the last lesson, I basically just said, I showed you how to do it if you just sort of convert from a histogram. And what I want to start with today is, what if you're going to draw a frequency polygon without drawing a histogram first? What if you have to go straight to drawing a frequency polygon? What do you think is the most important information for drawing a frequency polygon? What do you have to have, and I'm emphasizing on the drawing, in order to draw a frequency polygon? You don't actually need a histogram. You just need something else. What do you think we have to draw a frequency polygon? What are the things I'm connecting? What are these things? What are they called? Hi, Muzi. Any ideas? What are these things in yellow? So if we don't have a histogram, but we could calculate what are these things called? So it's the coordinates. Yes, it's the coordinates from the midpoint of the histogram. So basically, even if we didn't have the histogram behind it, if we knew what these coordinates were, we could easily draw a frequency polygon. And so I just want to practice one example like that before we move on to the ogive. And this is what we were doing at the end of the last lesson. So here's an example of a group data table. What we have is we have 132 students in grade 12 complete this census. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to have basically an extra column for the point that we are going to add, but we also need to add a column or an interval for the beginning. So in this case, I suppose it would go from -5 to 0, And at the end, it would go from 30 to 35. Now, the reason we're adding these two extra intervals is because we need a frequency of 0 in those two. And what I want you guys to do now is I want you to figure out what are the midpoints of this interval. So I want you to write down the midpoints. I want you to fill out this column. And then, if you're able to, I want you to think about what are the points that are going to be on my frequency polygon. So try and work out this column as well. If you get stuck, I would love to hear a question from you. But if you think about where the middle is, the middle of my interval, what do you think I'm going to put in these things here? So for this one, the first one is going to be 2.5. Yep, Rachel, you're absolutely correct. Remember, though, there's also an interval above that. So that would just be minus 2.5 and then 2.5. So can you fill out these ones? And then once you filled out that one, can you figure out what the points are going to be? Yeah, Sibachle. I see you have your hand up. Sibachle, what's your question? Can you hear me, Sibachle?
I want to say the answer for. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, please go for it. What have you got the answer for the midpoints?
Yes, it is 7,5.
Perfect. Next one.
12,5.
Perfect. Do you notice any pattern?
Yes.
What pattern do you notice?
You add 5.
Perfect. So once you see that pattern, you can actually fill out the rest of these, and then basically you'll get those as your midpoints. Now, while I've got you, Sibachle, what about a point? How do I go from, say, the first row, or let's just focus on this row. What point will be on my frequency polygon if I use this row? What point do you think I'm going to plot?
It is negative 2,5.
Yeah, so if for the top one, it'll be negative 2.5 for the first bit. And then what is the second, what's the y coordinate going to be? If you think about a frequency polygon, you've got the intervals.
It is 0.
And you've got here.
0.
Yeah, it's going to be 0. Perfect. And the second, before I let you go, because you've done so well, what do you think the second one is? What do you think the second point is going to be?
It will be 8,5.
So it'll be 2,5, and then what's the y coordinate going to be?
5.
So it's going to be 12, because it's the frequency here. So 2.5 and 12. Okay. I want everybody else to figure out I'm going to give you 2 minutes or so. Can you figure out the rest of these? And then you can give me some of the points that you get. See if you can see how I'm getting those points. So for this next one, all that we're going to get is we're going to get 7.5, and we're going to get 29. And then for the next one, we're going to get 12.5, and then we're going to get 13. So guys, you know what? I don't want to spend too much time on this. And so I'm actually going to pause for a second and just say this. Why am I showing you this? Basically, if they want you to only do it with points, it's not super common, but all you have to do is add an extra column. And then when you're basically figuring out a frequency polygon, you always go to the middle. And so what you would get is basically that would be the perfect table. And you're simply adding an extra interval on the beginning and the end in order to bring your frequency polygon back down to the ground, basically. So I'm actually, because of time, I do want to spend the majority of my time today working on the ogive, but a frequency polygon is really just using the middle of an interval as the x coordinate. So if you think about the coordinates, it's going to be the x coordinate is going to be the middle of the interval, and the y coordinate is going to be the frequency. Okay. And so that's all you need to understand. Once you know the middle of the interval is the x, the frequency is the y, then all you do is you plot the points and you add them. Sorry, you join them. You join them. And you join them with straight lines. Okay. I think that because of time, I'm going to say that we're going to move on from this for a moment, or move on from this now for now. Give me a thumbs up if you understand the basic idea behind frequency polygon, though, and thumbs down if you feel a bit confused. I just want to have a quick class check. I think the main ideas have been consolidated, but I just want to do a quick. Okay, so Rachel's feeling in between. So Rachel, all you really need to do is, for the frequency polygon, it's basically the x is the middle of the interval, the y is the frequency. Most of the time, you will find that drawing it from the histogram is the way that you can do it. And so even if you're a little bit confused, don't worry about it too much for today. Okay. Okay. Let's move on to what's called a cumulative frequency curve. Now, a cumulative frequency curve is a little bit different to the curves that we were studying before. Instead of having just a frequency column, we now need to add a cumulative frequency column. And instead of using the middle of the interval, we are now going to start using the point is going to be plotted at the upper limit of the interval. Okay, so those are the two main things. An ogive is a curve that shows the information in a cumulative frequency table, and the graph is useful for estimating the median and interquartile range of group data. We'll get to that later. The main difference that I want to focus on is you need the cumulative frequency and you use the upper limit of the interval. So I'm going to take a question in a moment because I see a student has a hand up. But can I ask, while I take that question, can you please fill out for me the cumulative frequency column of this table? This table is showing the time in minutes taken by learners to travel to school. And before you can draw an ogive or cumulative frequency curve, you have to be able to fill out this column. Okay, so go for it. And then I'm going to answer the question of a student whose hand was up. Whose hand was up?
She put it down, Mr. S. It was Lengiwe.
Okay. So how would we fill up this first curve? What is this column going to be?
Mr. S?
Yeah.
Bonga is asking if he can take a screenshot of the previous information you had there.
Yes, we can. Let me just try and get it on the same screen. How about that? Does that help, Bonga?
Mr. S, can you take a question from David?
I can. Go ahead, David.
Sir, I got lost there for the cumulative frequency. For me to find it, like the first block, am I not gonna see 12 minus 4?
Okay.
It gives me 4. Wait.
So in the first row, David, the frequency and the cumulative frequency will be the same because it's only in the second row that it'll start to change. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, what is 4 plus 12? And that gives you 16.
16. Okay.
And so so basically what that's saying, if you look at the data here, there are 16 students who take between 0 and 20 minutes to get to school. Now, what do you think, David, is going to be the next total over here? If I've got to 16 so far, and then I add 28 more students over here, what do you think the next column is going to be here? Any ideas?
Okay, so I'm calculating.
Perfect. Perfect. What do you get there? Yes, Rachel, watch out. Remember, this is a different type of curve where we use the end of the upper limit. So what I was thinking is, shouldn't we add 16 and 28 together? What do you get for that?
44.
Perfect. Yes. And so, David, using that same idea, what do you think we're going to add to 44 to get the next cumulative frequency? So I think we would add the 32 and we would get 76. And then after that, we would add the 29 and we get 105. And then the last bit, we would add 15 to 105 and we get 120. So what we've done there is we've just basically the first row will always be the same. And after you've done the first row, you just add whatever's in the frequency column to accumulate it in the cumulative frequency. Now, the question, and this is what Sihao is asked, is, so how would you ordered pairs be points to plot? Okay. How do we get basically the points that we plot on the ogive? Now, there's a big difference with an ogive, and that is that we take our x coordinate. So if you think of an ordered pair, there's always going to be an x and a y. When we do our ordered pair from our table with the cumulative frequency curve, we always look at the end of the interval. So what's the end of interval 1? What do you guys think the end of this interval is? What's the end of 0 to 10? It's going to be, of course, 10. So the x coordinate for our ogive is going to be 10. What is the cumulative? What is the y value? It's just going to be whatever the cumulative frequency is. So the very first point here is going to be 10, 4. However, the second point for an ogive, what's the end of the second interval? The end of the second interval is going to be 20. But now, what is the cumulative frequency total in the second row? It's going to be 16. So when we are getting our, when we are drawing our ogive, we need to know that the x coordinate is the end of the interval. The y coordinate is just the cumulative frequency total. And so I want you to try and generate these points, generate the rest of the points, and then try and plot these points on a Cartesian plane. So for an ogive, the vertical column is the cumulative frequency. The horizontal will just be the intervals of data. And so it goes up to 60. So I'm just going to say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So what are the remaining points going to be here? And can you plot those points on basically a set of axes where the vertical axis is the cumulative frequency and the horizontal axis are the intervals? So the points that I'm getting are 10, 4, 20, 16, 30, 44, 40, 76, 50, 105, 60, and 120. And what I'm wanting you to do now is I'm wanting you to draw and try and plot these points on a sort of basically where you have your cumulative frequency on the vertical and your intervals on the horizontal. And what are they? The intervals of time. Can you plot me these points? What's that going to look like? So basically, we're making sure we know how to draw an ogive. So 10, 4, 2016. Once you have completed your ogive or you've got as far as you can, will you just click done in the chat so I know where you are? So what you'll see is I have 6 dots over here, and those 6 dots represent the 6 points that are coming from my basically my grouped data table. And what I want to know is when you feel like you've plotted those 6 points, I want you to say done in the chat so I get a sense of where you are. Now, unfortunately, plotting the points is not the only thing you need to draw an ogive. There's 2 more things I need to do. And so maybe if you're finished, can you tell me what are the 2 other things I still need to do? What are the 2 other things I still need to do to complete my ogive? Who would like to raise their hand? You can tell me, or you can put it in the chat. We have to connect the points. How do we connect the points, Dawn? And also, is there anything else? Is our ogive allowed to start off the ground, or does it need to return back to 0? Those are the types of questions I want to ask. At the moment, it looks like my first point is in line with 10, and it's in line with a cumulative frequency that's above 0. Okay. Yes. So we have to add an extra point, which is it's 0 on the cumulative frequency thing, and it's at the beginning of our first interval. So that point would actually be 0, 0. It's at the beginning of the first interval, and it has to be in line with 0. And then so we add that extra point so that we start at 0, and then we join these points not with straight lines, but with curved lines. And the highest point I'm going to get to is a cumulative frequency of 120. And 120 is basically our N value for this particular setting. So in this data set, there are 120 students who are involved. And we know that because that is the total of, that's what the cumulative frequency gets up to. It incorporates everything, we get to 120. So what are the steps? Because we're going to do another one of these after the break. What are the key steps that we need to know when we draw an ogive? First thing is we need a cumulative frequency column. And we need to total up that cumulative frequency column. Then what we need is we need another column for ordered pairs. The ordered pairs are just the XY coordinates that are going to basically be the points on our ogive. We also, once we've done it, we need to know that we are using the end point of an interval. So given an interval, we're not using the middle, we're using the end point. So basically my X coordinate is the end point of the interval. My Y coordinate is the cumulative frequency. So I get all my points. I then plot all my points, but I realize I have to start from 0. So I add one more point at the bottom, and then I join it using a curved line. Now, the other important thing is to recognize that in your table, you are given the number of data items in the data set, which is n is 120. After the break, I'm going to show you how you can use an ogive to estimate the median, to estimate the upper quartile, to estimate a whole number of items. But in order to do that, you need to know how to find n. And so I just want to mention that now. Okay. So that is the halfway point of our lesson. And you know what we do now. Just to let our brains have a little break, I would love for you to turn on your cameras and just do a little stretch. And then Lebo, if you could please give a shout out to our most industrious students who are stretching it out, and I'm going to do the same. And then we'll continue after the break with these ogives.
Come on, guys. Turn those cameras on. Let us see your lovely
Here we go.
faces.
Sebastian,
Join us in the
loving it.
stretch.
Rucanio, David.
Yes. Shout out David. Picanho.
Let's oh, that's double click. That felt good.
Come on, your mind deserves a break.
Invest in yourself, guys. Do whatever loosens you up and just
Don't says she has load shedding. It's all good. It's all good. I hope you're still stretching though.
okay. All right. So I feel awesome because I stretched. I hope you do too. My brain has been reborn. I want to go to a brain break quickly. So here's my brain break for today. Tell me, how many squares are there in this drawing? And then Sibachli, I see you have a question. What is your question? Let's go to you.
I'll be asking on ogives curve that you have drawn before.
Okay, we're going to come back to that in a moment. We just have like a little halfway point break in the lesson. And then, so we're just going to do this a little, and then we'll come to your questions, I promise. Okay.
Okay, then.
Awesome. So guys, some of you are saying 10, and you're not wrong, but I want to point something out. What about the square over here? Isn't that also a square? So how many squares are there in this drawing? I agree that there is at least 10, because you can imagine that that's 9, and this one is 10. But what about the other ones? So what do we think the total number of squares are? Okay, you guys are very smart. So the 10 gets us the ones that are obvious, but there are extra ones. That's the one extra one, 2, 3, and 4. And so the correct answer is 14.
Well done, guys.
So I hope I see that Swap, Stephanie, and Tombi, Dawn, and Kaklejo got that right. And so I thought I'd try something a little different today. Instead of the number one, we would do something geometric. So I'm glad I can see many of you enjoyed it. Okay, let's get back to the second half of the lesson. So the first half of the lesson was about getting comfortable with this thing called an ogive, knowing that we need points in order to plot the ogive. Now, we can also start to estimate things. So let's actually go on to another example. So let's do another one just like we did, and then we'll start to extend it. So if I look at this story, it's heights of students in a class. If I want to draw a ogive, I don't have the cumulative frequency, which you're going to figure out, but you also are going to need to add another column for the point. I want you to try and figure out the cumulative frequency column and the point column. And then I want you to say in the chat, you can just say done when you've done those two columns. However, if there are questions, I think Hao wanted a question. I will also take questions while we are basically doing this practice round here. And then once you've done your points, we're obviously going to draw another ogive. Well, Sibakle had some questions. So you're doing this column and you're doing this column. What are you guys getting for that? I'm going to have to use my calculator too. So when I add up my cumulative frequency column, I get that the N is 90, or there's 90 total items in this data set. Because I got 5 plus 9 is 14. 14 plus 17 is 31, and so on. I want you now to think, what are the points that I'm going to need to have in order to plot this, basically draw an ogive from it. Now remember, when we look at I know we have to add an extra interval, and you could add this now, or you could just add it at the end. Both are fine. I'm going to start with this one. What's the end of that interval? The end of that interval is 95. And what is the cumulative frequency column? It's just going to be 5. So 95, 5 should be the first one. And then the second row should be 114. Right, 114. So see if you can figure out the rest of the points. And then for those who are feeling comfortable, you can start to draw up your, you can start to sort of think about what would my ogive look like? So we're going to move towards, but we're not there yet. We're just moving towards that. What are the points that we need on my ogive? We'll go from there. So also there's a bit of a pattern developing here. You can kind of see 105, 110, 115, 120, and then here it's going to be 31, 59, 80, and 90. Now, some of you may want to put in that initial point up here, or you can put it on the graph. But what I want you to do next is I want you to draw up on your vertical axis, you're going to have cumulative frequency. On your horizontal, you are going to start at 90 and go all the way up to 120. So 100, 110, 120. And I want you to plot these points and join them to draw a cumulative frequency curve on ogive. And once you're done with that, just put in the chat curve done or ogive done. So I'm going to do 95.5. Okay, so that was my first point. 114 would probably be up to 105. Right, so 19. No, actually, this would be fine. That 95 should be on this 2, 4, 6. So it's going to be in the middle one. And then 100 is 14, 105, 31. Yeah, there. 110, 59. There. Let me zoom in a little bit. And 115, 80. Should be there. And then 120, 90. Should be there. So, it's a bit thicker. So we should have these points along the way. And because I'm not touching the ground, I have to add an extra point for the beginning of basically at 0, and it's going to be at 90, 0, which is that point there. So we're not, and again, when you're done with this, to say ogive done in the table, but I'm almost done. I've put all my points there, but there's still a final step I need to do. I've got 6 points and I have to join them up. So how do I draw this ogive? So it's a curved line and it should look something like that. Okay, now what I want to move to next is, I think the process, if you're feeling a bit rushed today, just re-watch this video, but in summarizing, how do I draw an ogive? This is what I need to do. I take a group data table, I add a cumulative frequency column, I then add another point column, and those points are done by taking the end point of the interval and the cumulative frequency. I then put those points on a set of axes where the cumulative frequency is labeled on the vertical and the intervals, in this case, we're talking about height, are labeled on the horizontal. What I want to do now is I want to estimate the median of this data set using the ogive. So I'm going to estimate the median using the ogive. And I want to ask, what do we normally do when we're going to calculate the median? What do we, in previous lessons, when we've talked about finding the median, what do we always do first? Who has an idea? What do you think we're going to do first? You can pop it in the chat or you can raise your hand. What do I normally always need to know what n is. That normally helps me a little bit. And then, yes, Mason, yes, it's the position. So you have to calculate the position of Q2 before you can actually get your estimate of Q2. But you also need n, the number of items in the data set. So does anybody want to tell me what is the number of items in this data set before I go along and estimate my median using the ogive? What is the n? What is the number of items in this data set? Who can tell me? What column or what thing do I need to look at? Dawn, you are spot on. It is 90. Now, normally, if I'm calculating the position of the median and I have n is 90, I use the formula a half times n plus 1. So in this case, the position of the median is going to be a half times 90 plus 1. And what you're going to see if I use my calculator for that is the position is 45.5 or 45.5 position. How do we now connect that to an actual value for an estimate of Q2? And what we do is we find 45.5 on the vertical axis. So if you look at the vertical axis, the cumulative frequency, I go 10, 20, 30, 40, 45.5 is going to be roughly around there. So how am I going to get my estimate? I draw a horizontal line across the curve and I hit over here. And this is the position of the median. Now, to get my actual median, what you're going to see is I need to drop a line straight down from that. What do you guys think the estimated median is for this group's data set? If you look at my table, or you look at my graph, what do you think this is telling us the estimated median is? Put that answer in the chat. What is my estimated median value? Yeah. So there's 90, there's 100, each bar 102, 104, 106, 108. Yeah. So we would say that the estimated median is just 108. So that was actually quite straightforward. We calculated its position. We then went to the cumulative frequency axis, the vertical axis. We drew a horizontal line. And then we drew a vertical line straight down and we got an estimate for my median. And so what that's saying is in this data set of, let's have a look at our table. So students are, the range is between 90 and 120. There are 50% of the students who are 108 or less in height, and there are 50% of the students who are between 108 and 120. I want to take this idea a little bit further. What if I ask you to calculate an estimated upper quartile or an estimated Q3? What do you think my first step is going to be here? I want to ask the class, what do you think my first step would be if I want an estimated Q3 from the data set? So pop into the chat or raise your hand to share. What do you think we're going to do? Yeah, find the position again. So just like we did last time, before we can get Q3, we find the position of Q3. And that formula is going to be 3/4 times n plus 1, which is 3/4 times 91. And so what do we get? 0.75 times 91. And you get 68.25. 68.25. I want you to look at my drawing, look at my ogive and look at your ogive and give me an estimated value for Q3, given that you know the position of Q3 is 68.25. Oh, nice, Bocanio. Nice, Ntombi. So 68.25, we find it on the cumulative frequency axis. So 68.25 will probably be around there. Oop. What do you think an estimated value for Q3 would be around? Put that in the chat.
Mr. Ace?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. Can you please explain why Q2's position can't be at 60? Because the students seem to think it has to be half of the, yeah.
Okay, so how in this particular data set, the end value is 90. And so we need to go halfway. Basically, we're counting up to 90 in data items. So halfway would be around 45. The 120 is the upper limit of the height. And so when we calculate position, we're only looking at the frequency count is the answer. So I hope that helps. It's basically, we're looking at the column with cumulative frequency.
Thanks, Mr. Ace.
Pleasure. So I like what I'm seeing. So if you look around here, the answer is going to be around about 112 or 113. It's not exact, but you can see that it's going up in twos. So Q3 will be around about 112 or 113 from my data set. And what that means is that Q3 is going to have 75% of the data below it. So 75% of students are 113 centimeters or less. 25% of students are going to be above 113 and less than or equal to 120. Okay, I like what I'm seeing. I like what I'm seeing. I would like you now to calculate for me an estimated version of the lower quartile, or what we call Q1. So using the same logic, remember N is 90. So there are 90 items in total. I want you to find me an estimated value for Q1. And you're going to start by working out the position of Q1, and then you'll get me an estimated value for Q1. Off you guys go. You're doing very nicely. So yeah, you should get 22.75 approximately for your position. Now, if you want to get your estimated value, that's not your value yet, that's just your position. So what do you think the estimated lower quartile is going to be? What's your estimate for your lower quartile? So I know that's 100. I know that's 102 because it goes up in twos, 104. Yeah, so to me, it looks around about 102 or 103, depending on how accurate your scale is. But I would say, I'll just put you 102 or 103. Either of those would be accepted as the correct answer. So what this is giving you, it's saying an estimate. Remember, this was a grouped data table. There was no list given to you. An estimate for the lower quartile would be 102 or 103 centimeters in height. Now, what does that mean? It means 25% of students are 102, 103 centimeters or shorter, and 75% of students are greater than 102 or 103 centimeters in height, up to the upper limit of 120. And so this process is very common. You basically go through the process of drawing your ogive. And in order to draw your ogive, you have to complete a table. Once you've done your ogive, you then use normal calculations, like I've shown you here, to get estimates for the upper quartile, the lower quartile, and you can even do this for percentiles, which we'll talk about in the next lesson. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to end tonight's lesson at this point because I think there might still be some questions. And so some students who have questions about today's lesson, I want to give you a chance to ask them. But while we are having sort of some open question time, I'm also going to put the poll up for today because we have 2 polls, and we would really appreciate you filling out those polls and helping us. So Lebo, if you could please share the polls with the students, and then if there are any remaining questions, I'm happy to take them.